Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Evisors webinar on Careers in Consulting with Kathleen Hebert. My name is Christina Pold from Evisors, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, we have a couple housekeeping items to take care of. So first, we do want this to be an interactive experience, so please ask questions through the chat as we go. You are able to ask questions to all attendees, so you can make your questions public, or you can ask them just to the host themselves. If you have any technical difficulties, you can also chat that. Just chat it directly to the host, and we'll resolve those as we go. For the best audio results, we have found that it's ideal to call in. If you do want to call in, if you look at the panel on the right side of your computer, there'll be a little phone. You click on that, and the telecom numbers will pop up. We will be recording today's session, and that will be available through your career services within the next week. In addition, we'll be posting a clip of the webinar and some of the tips and tricks on our Facebook and Twitter accounts, so you can check out those as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our featured expert today, Kathleen Hebert. I had the pleasure of working at BCG with Kathleen a number of years ago. And I think we'll find that her background gives her a lot of experience to pull from and can give you a great perspective on what it's like to be a consultant and how to prepare for a career in consulting. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kathleen to get started.
Thanks, Christine. I'm just going to start with a little bit of an introduction about myself. Before I get there, I just want to thank Evisors for having me and thank all of you on the call for joining. I'm looking forward to hopefully providing some helpful advice about a career in management consulting, and of course, at the end, happy to answer any of your questions if we haven't covered everything during the prepared section. So I am a recent graduate of Harvard Business School this past May, also graduated from Queen's University in Canada with a BCom before that. I was a consultant for the Boston Consulting Group for 3 years between college and my MBA in Toronto and in London. And I start back in London this November. And yes, you counted right. That means I've been off for nearly 6 months this summer, which is wonderful. I have had internships in a variety of industries, so things like social media, automotive, government, banking. So consider myself relatively well-versed in how to compare some of the other types of jobs out there that you might be looking at versus consulting. So if that's a question you want to ask later, feel free to. On the personal side, I love wine and food. I actually recently ran a marathon with Christine here, which was great, and do love traveling. Been to over 40 countries, and I leave on Sunday for Nepal. I am on the Evisors network. I've done over 10 consultations this year, and I would say I think all of them were case interview preparation. So happy to take your calls on this network as well and help you with any case prep or interview prep.
Excellent, Kathleen. Thank you very much. So one question that we get a lot at Evisors is, what is consulting? What can we expect when we start looking at the consulting field? So maybe you can give a little bit of a background and an overview of the industry, some of the firms, and some of the major differences between the firms.
Sure. So I like to say that management consulting is the toughest job to explain to your grandmother. I don't think mine has a great sense of what exactly it is. So let me start with how I describe it. Basically, management consulting is helping organizations improve their performance. So basically, as a consultant, you analyze an organization's problems and you develop, as well as sometimes implement, plans to solve those problems. Very hand in hand with the client, who ultimately is responsible for both identifying the problems and developing the solutions. I like to say also that consultants tend to become advisors to the clients we work with. Often we are in a position to teach them frameworks, methods, strategies that we've used on the job with other clients so that they can improve their own performance on a personal level as well as on a firm-wide level. So that's how I would describe the sort of the job. In terms of, Christine, you were asking about the industry. This is a very simplified slide, but what I'm trying to show you is that management consulting is not just Bain, BCG, and McKinsey, which is how a lot of people, especially at business school, think about the industry. Management consulting is incredibly broad, and you have really several different types of firms that you can get involved with in this industry. So there are, of course, I would call them the big three private firms, BCG, McKinsey, and Bain. And with those, of course, you'll get offices around the world. You'll get the alumni network, and you will get you know, a real sense for working. Again, this is where my experience comes from, so I can talk more in depth about these firms. But you really do work on management strategy type problems, hand in hand with senior clients at really only Fortune 500 companies and the equivalent in other countries. That's because it's relatively expensive to hire these firms, so it's really only very big companies that are hiring them. In terms of the other traditional management consulting firms, you'll see firms like Monitor, Booz, A.T. Kearney, LEK, Capgemini, the list goes on. These firms will do typically the same kind of work as McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. Usually they'll just do it in different client areas. So for instance, Booz does a lot of government work in the DC area. So that's an example of them sort of specializing in a type of management consulting. You also find large diversified consultancies, and I can speak to these. Both my brother and cousin work for Accenture and Oliver Wyman, respectively. We're a consulting family. These firms really do a whole gamut of consulting, so not just management strategy. Places like Accenture, you'll see a lot of IT work, IT strategy implementation. Same with places like Oliver Wyman, where you'll see a lot more technical type of advising. So things like, how do we determine the pricing strategy in the airlines? And they actually build pricing models for airlines. So can get much more technical, I would say, and also sometimes much more interesting and in-depth with the client on longer-term projects. You'll also have sort of specialized or boutique firms, and typically these are by industry. So you'll find things like Hewitt and Hay, which are HR specific. You'll find firms like Novantis, which are in the healthcare industry. So things like patents in the healthcare industry is a very specialized type of consulting, how to work on patent law and insurance and all that type of thing. So there are firms that specialize in specific industries. Other industries you would see for this would be IT consulting. I mentioned healthcare, engineering consulting, government consulting, et cetera. So if you're interested in a particular industry, sometimes it's actually better to specialize with a boutique firm that's only going to work in that industry. And then the last one, which people often forget, is that a lot of large companies have their own internal strategy consulting groups. Pepsi is one of them, Amex is one of them. Those are two of the more famous ones, and certainly I know alumni from BCG that have worked in those groups. And this is another avenue. Often you work with consultants quite a bit. A lot of people ask me, you know, if I don't have a business background, how can I get into consulting? You know, places like McKinsey won't hire me. This is a great entry route because you're getting a flavor for what consulting is all about within a big company, and typically working with consultants, and so you can often make the jump.
Excellent, Kathleen. One question that is often raised, and actually just got raised on our chat window, is, you know, when these firms are looking at MBA candidates, are they looking for anyone with a particular specialization, or is there a difference across the types of firms in terms of what they're looking for in their MBA candidates?
That's a great question. I would say that, and we will get to what firms are looking for later in the presentation. I've made that part of the presentation broader and more for the first two groups in terms of the larger management consultancy firms. And so when we get there, we can talk about general skills that the firms are looking for. But definitely, if you're looking at, you know, a boutique management consultancy, or for instance, I would say that those kinds of firms are going to look for you to have experience in that industry. Similarly, if you're looking at an internal corporate consulting group, you want to have a story as to why you want to work on that side of the fence, per se. Why is it that you want to work at Pepsi in their consulting division? And maybe it's because you have a passion for consumer goods or you've worked in consumer goods, but having a story for why you want to be in that specific group and doing consulting, I think is really important for those firms. But like I said, we'll get to more general skills later in the presentation.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Good.
So now that you've kind of given the lay of the land in terms of what the industry looks like, what are different tools that exist that you can point students to either research the industry or learn more about the various firms? What would you say?
Sure. So this is going to seem like a pretty general list. So I'll give some meat behind it. I like to start quite broad. A really great place to look for very broad information about the industry is definitely Vault. There you'll find things like industry overviews. You'll have a firm ranking, which will typically give you a lot of some of the sort of interesting facts about the firms, number of employees, number of offices, etc. And you can also find these firm rankings, just as a side note, on websites like Fortune. They do rankings of firms often, and the consultancies are often included in those. So you can get more information about the types of benefits and perks and positives and negatives about the firms on those firm rankings. Vault will also give you resume and cover letter advice. They'll give you practice consulting cases. There's also some really good online forums that you can join and talk to other people that are interested in the industry. I also recommend that you look at the firm or the firms in particular that you're researching, and starting with their website. You'll get a lot more detailed information there about number of offices, number of employees. Often they have specific websites by office. You'll get a sense for whether they're private or public, their CEO, their head office location, all the kind of information that you want to get a sense for in terms of whether or not to apply and for interview preparation. I would also say that firm websites are going to give you really important information about the recruiting process. What are the online or offline steps? How many interviews will you have? What are the types of interviews, etc. They will also have practice consulting cases, and I would suggest that you look at those both for interview preparation, but actually as a first step to think about, do I like the type of problem that this firm has put on their website for me to solve, and do I like how they solved it? Because that'll give you a sense for whether or not this is the kind of place that you would like working. These are the kinds of problems you would like to work on. And finally, I suggest that you take a really good look at the website and think about what are the keywords that this firm uses a lot that will signal to you what the firm's about. For BCG, you will see impact everywhere. We want to have impact with our clients. We want to have impact on our people. And a lot of their programs are designed around that. For Bain, you'll see results everywhere on their website, for instance. They're really focused on driving results and measuring against results. And so really important for you to think about what are the keywords that these firms put out there and what does that say about them. I'd of course also suggest that you meet with people at the firms, schedule an informational interview or a coffee chat with an ex or a current consultant, maybe at your school as a starting point. Definitely meet with the recruiting head or members of the recruiting team at your school. And if there isn't a recruiting team at your school for the firm you're interested in, then look for friends of friends. Go online, look at LinkedIn. Go to Evisors, of course. These are all places where you can find people that have worked at these firms or that work at these firms to try and get in front of them. Even a quick call just to learn more about them is really important. I'd also suggest,
on that, Kathleen, in terms of firm meetings, if you're approaching someone who, let's say, either is a secondary connection on LinkedIn or an alumni, how would you kind of think about approaching or phrasing it? Because let's say you don't yet have an interview at one of these firms, what are your suggestions on kind of getting that coffee chat or getting that first meeting?
That's a really great question, Christine, and it's going to depend a lot on the other side of the table, on the type of person you have on the other line, of course, and what they're up to and how busy they are. But I have to tell you, I get a lot of LinkedIn messages from people that are interested in consulting, interested in BCG, and in particular that are interested in London, Americans and Canadians that want to move over. And I tend to respond to the ones that make that case and sort of say, I'm really interested in London. I see that you're a Canadian that's working in London for BCG. I want to know how you did that. I want to hear what it's like, et cetera. As opposed to, I want to know what it's like to work at BCG. And so I give you that example because I think it's really important that you're very specific with the person that you're talking to. Make a connection either to the city, the office, to someone you know in common, to a specific question you have. And I'll get to this a little bit later, but this forum right here is the kind of place where if you want me to answer what does the typical day in the life of a consultant look like, I'll answer that here. But that's not something that I think you should ask someone on a LinkedIn message or in a coffee chat. You want to get more specific and really make sure you're using their time in a way that that you couldn't have on Google.
Right. On that, maybe you can run through the rest of how to research the industry, but I definitely think that some people on the line would like to hear a little bit more about a day in the life of. So maybe we can do that right after this. Perfect.
So I'll just finish up this slide. The last 2 points I think are really important. Set up Google alerts, or if there's a similar type of alert that you like to use for the firms you're interviewing. It of course would be unfortunate if you're meeting someone for coffee or further down the line in an interview and you didn't know something in the news recently about that company. And you can perform a basic literature search for recent events, prior to that Google alert, just so that you're aware of what's going on. I think it's really great when people go into interviews and they can ask questions about recent news about a firm because it shows that they've done their research. And lastly, I put a few other websites down. Management Consulting, Ace the Case, etc. Throw these into Google and look them up. There's often a lot of free practice cases. Of course, there are some that you can pay for. Lots of general info, more online forums for you to get information. The quality varies, but some good sites nonetheless for you to look at. Okay, so let me just chat about typical day in the life so you get a sense what that's like before we move on. So I like to start by saying that the typical day in the life varies on 2 dimensions. I sound like a consultant. And the first dimension is whether you're on a travel case or a local case. And the second dimension is the day of the week. Now that might sound a little funny, so I'll give you a bit more detail. When you're on a travel case, your life is very different from when you're in the office. Starting with the fact that you wake up on Monday morning and you get on an airplane, or in my case in Europe, you get on a train, and you go to a client site, which means you're actually traveling to that site and you're setting up basically your mobile desk at that client, typically in a conference room style room with the rest of your team. You'll often meet with your clients all day, be running workshops, running meetings, and spending a lot of time with the client as well as your direct team members that are there with you. The evenings consist of, a workout and dinner at the hotel and some more work typically. Given that you're away from home, that's sort of what ends up happening at night. You come home Thursday evening typically. Again, some firms do a 3-day model, but typically it's 4. And depending on how far you are, it can be Thursday night. And I would say that what this means is you usually have longer days. You have less interaction with the rest of the colleagues at your firm, particularly in your office. And you definitely have a more limited personal life. That's just a fact. When you're on a local case, the difference is that you're in the office. So you can typically be interacting more often with people that aren't directly on your project, which is nice, people from other projects in the office. You don't have the travel, of course. And you're either meeting more often with your team or you are traveling, sort of within the city to your client for meetings. So again, there's trade-offs. You're not sitting right beside your client and able to talk to him all the time, but you are sitting beside your colleagues. In terms of the personal life, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's much better. It's less limited in that you're in the city. If you need to go to a dentist appointment, you can do that. If you want to see friends, you can do that. The challenge is that there's more pressure on you because you're in the city to go and do things at night, and sometimes that means compromising on, you know, a couple of even later nights or some weekend work because you've chosen to go out for dinner a couple nights a week or things like that. So I would say that those are the trade-offs between a local and a travel case. And when I say day of the week, it's really because Fridays are kind of special in consulting. Because typically you've been gone Monday to Thursday or you've been working hand-in-hand with your client, Friday is exciting because you're back in the office. Friday is typically the day when there's office meetings, office updates, training sessions. That's the day you do your expenses, you book your travel for the following week, you catch up with your colleagues. So it really tends to be an administrative type day in consulting, again, often because you're traveling during the rest of the week. So I hope that helps. It's a pretty detailed day in the life, but to give you a sense of the trade-offs you face.
Yeah, and on that, Kathleen, you know, clearly your life changes a lot from a travel to a local case. You know, you walked through kind of the lay of the land of the industry earlier on. Is there a big difference in terms of the types of firms that travel or specific firms that travel more than others? You know, how can students get a sense of which are going to be a higher travel component versus others?
So I think it's both the type of firm and the location. So I'm not going to travel as much in London because London has a lot of clients right in the city. If you were to be, let's say, located in Washington, D.C., and your firm doesn't do any government work, chances are you're going to be traveling a lot. Alternatively, if your firm does government work and you're in Washington, you won't be traveling a lot. So, you know, I think you need to think about both the firm, the type of clients that they work with, and then the city that you're in. You know, it's the same for some of these specialized and boutique firms. If you want to work in healthcare, then you should pick a firm that has an office or pick an office for a firm that is close to either the major pharmaceutical companies or major government health organizations or major private health organizations, because that means you won't travel as much.
Okay, excellent. So, you know, moving on a little bit, just cognizant of the time here. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, we referred to this earlier, but, you know, specific qualities firms are looking for that students can either call out in their work history or call out in their resume and cover letter?
Sure. Like I said, these are pretty general. I'll call out the ones that I think are most important. Firms are definitely looking for professionalism, maturity. You might call it by a different word. Basically, you're going to be in front of senior clients often, quite frequently in consulting, and so they want to hire people that demonstrate that they can interact with senior people on a frequent basis in a professional manner. I would say that's a base level. They're also really looking for people that enjoy problem solving and are competent at problem solving, as well as competent at analytical work. They want people that on two fronts, and I sort of put the Microsoft equivalent, but are able to work with data and also to create and give presentations. So the great thing about consulting is really you get the quantitative aspect, but you also really get this people-facing strategic aspect. And so this job really makes you have both skill sets and forces you to use both skill sets as you analyze a problem and then work with a client to solve it. A couple of other broader ones that I think you should definitely touch on in your resume and a cover letter as well as in your interviews, things like teamwork. You'll be on a team in consulting, so that you know that you've done that and that you've been successful working in teams is important. That you enjoy working in teams is really important. That you've had leadership experience, as well that you're adept at time management with all this traveling and the amount of work that you can sometimes have. That's really important. People management, sort of as you come out of your MBA, that'll start to get more and more important in terms of your own team. But managing a client and sometimes difficult clients is something that you want to demonstrate. And certainly flexibility, as I've demonstrated with, your travel and your personal life, I think is really important. Given those skills, I think you want to position yourself as someone who's driven and motivated. You want to show why you want to be in consulting. I talked about this a little bit before, but why do you want to work for that specific firm, and what do you bring to the table? Show that you've worked in teams and that you understand, you're willing and flexible to deal with stress and senior people and travel and all of those things. And most importantly, that you enjoy problems and analytical work, because you'll do that on the job.
And Kathleen, for people that, in terms of previous work experience, so if you haven't worked in consulting before, is that a negative, or what types of backgrounds are they looking for as they screen resumes?
Definitely not a negative. I think that's the great thing about consulting coming out of college, coming out of an MBA. They are open to people with a very diverse set of backgrounds. Everything from the military to corporate life to investment bankers, and even ex-consultants who maybe worked in a more specialized industry. The great thing about consulting is it can come in many different shapes and sizes in terms of the type of work you're doing, the type of client you have. And so consulting firms like to hire a wide range of people with different skills that can help solve those problems, because sometimes it'll come from, the ex-opera singer or the ex, mechanical engineer who just worked on something similar in their previous life, or thinks about a problem differently than the run-of-the-mill consultant. So I definitely don't think it's a negative. I think what you want to do, though, is if you have maybe a unique background, is you want to highlight why it's going to help you be a good management consultant. And certainly if you haven't had any analytical or quantitative background, you want to highlight where you've been able to practice any kind of analytics or quantitative work to show the firm that you can do it. And so things like coursework, your grades in certain finance classes, things like that, just to show them that you have brushed up on your quantitative skills.
Right, and you mentioned one thing about grades there. There was a question through the chat saying, management consultants, are they, is it a particularly academic environment? And, because of that, how much do grades really matter? So are they going to require you to disclose? And if so, what are the, are they only accepting A students? How would you frame that?
It's going to depend on the firm in terms of disclosure, and certainly the school as well. Post MBA, I have not seen a lot of focus on the grades. It's typically in college that you see a lot more focus when kids coming out of college in terms of their grades. That being said, I think there is a certain bar that you have to pass, and I understand that comes across as seeming academic from a firm's perspective in terms of, we need people with certain grade point averages, and therefore we consider ourselves highly academic. The fact of the matter is grades are a good benchmark for someone's intelligence level, and so the firms will often use this as kind of a hurdle rate. Again, I would say, though, coming out of your MBA, they look more for your reasons for wanting to be a consultant, the relevant experience in your background that prepares you to be a consultant. And if for instance, your grades really were, a challenge for you in college or in your MBA, then they'll want an explanation as to why that is. And if you have a good one, then I think you would still be considered.
Right, and then there's probably some other areas that you could pull, evidence from in terms of your academic strength. So if it's not necessarily your GPA in your MBA, maybe it is in your college, or it's your GMAT or your SAT or something that you can point to that you have the, let's say, analytical horsepower in order to do the job.
That's a great point. Absolutely.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, excellent. So now that we've gone over a little bit in terms of how you might frame your background in your resume and your cover letter, kind of some of the qualities you just spoke about, let's talk a little bit about the actual interview and what to expect, how to prepare, some of your thoughts on that.
Okay, sure. I've broken this section down into two parts. There's the recruiting process as well as the interview itself. I'll start with the recruiting process. Just a couple of things, well, three things here that I want to touch on. The first is networking. We talked a little bit about this before. Really important for you to use your school resources, including professors, use social media, LinkedIn, etc. Use friends of friends, and try and find people at the firms and learn more about the firms. And of course, follow up with those people and try and get into the firms and understand the firms and their recruiting process so that you're well prepared for what's ahead. You should also learn about what the application process specifically is all about. A cover letter and a resume are standard requirements. For both, I would say absolutely no longer than a page, and make sure you're using, the right firm name. I hate to say it, but it does happen. Make sure your grammar and spelling are correct. Make sure that you are, if you can, that you're dropping a contact or a reference that you've met or spoken to. Make sure, we've talked about this a bit, but make sure you highlight what's not, excuse the term, but what's not popping on your resume. So again, if it's grades, if it's not showing on your resume that you are, that you had great grades in college, then highlight your GMAT score in your cover letter or explain the rationale for those grades. In terms of the resume itself, again, highlight your analytical, team, client management, and leadership skills. As much as you can, highlight specific quantifiable impacts that you've had in a previous employment. So for instance, you were able to save X million dollars in cost for this company because of a new process you put in place. That would be a great line in a resume, of course, better said than that, but because there's a quantifiable result that you've had. Each school and then each firm will often have different variations in the submission process, so make sure you check with your school what theirs is as well as what the firms, if it's not a firm that's recruiting at your school, which a lot of these firms might not, then check their website, speak to a recruiter, and see if you're supposed to submit it online or if there's a particular person. You might also face some sort of test, a math test, an IQ test. Some of the firms are rolling these out either online or in person prior to the interview. So make sure you understand what those tests are about and when you have to do them prior to your interview. And of course, I'll keep saying this throughout, but keep following up with all the contacts that you meet, especially recruiters, and thanking them for their help. In terms of preparation, we discussed a lot of this in the research, so I won't touch on it in terms of how to prepare. What I want to touch on is a couple of questions that I think you should focus on in your preparation as you go into interviews. There's 3 questions that I think you should have answers to. Everybody that's going into a management consulting interview should have answers to these 3 questions. The first is, why do I want a career in consulting? The second is, why do I want a career with firm X? And the third is, what will I bring to firm X as a consultant? Or alternatively, why should firm X hire me? If you have answers to those 3 questions, you're going to cover a lot of the types of behavioral questions you'll get in an interview, and it'll just make sure that you're really sharp about why you're doing this and about all of the different firms. And I want to make sure when you answer the question, why do I want a career with firm X, make sure you're really specific. All the firms will hear that you want to work there because they have great people. That's not specific enough. So really think about why you want to work for Accenture or why you want to work for McKinsey and why it's different from the other firms. Prepare your answers to other behavioral questions, things like, describe a situation when you've been in a team that didn't work out. But also, not just the types of questions you need to prepare for, but think about the way you're going to answer behavioral questions. A lot of people focus on the case interview, we'll get there in a minute, and how to answer a case. you should also think about how you're going to answer a behavioral question, because consultants really like structured answers. So I would think about starting with a headline. So here's the problem and here's how I solved it. Describe the situation very briefly. Identify maybe 2 or 3 issues or strong points depending on the question. And then identify 2 or 3 ways in which you got out of the situation or which made you successful in the situation, and describe your learning. So what did you get out of this? Finally, I would briefly, in a sentence or 2, just mention why this experience is relevant to consulting or to you working at this firm. I think it's a nice way to bring the question full circle and back to the interviewer by saying something like, it was a really tough experience, but I think my learning is going to be really relevant for me moving forward, especially in my role with Accenture, where I'll have to work in teams all the time. So bringing it back to the question and the firm, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I mean, Kathleen, I can't underscore that point enough in terms of being prepared for those questions, because a lot of the people that, both you and I have interviewed over the years is they have great stories, but they get lost, and they'll take 5-10 minutes trying to describe this, and they haven't got it down to a really concise, just as you laid it out, what's the headline, what's the situation, what did I do, and, how was it resolved, and what did I learn? And I think just really focusing on having those really tight stories makes you pop as a candidate, and you're more memorable. So I definitely agree. We just had a question, just taking a one step back, actually, on the application side of things. When firms are not recruiting directly at your school, or perhaps you're even applying, out of cycle, and you have to go through an online submission, is there a real downside to online submissions, and how can you kind of better increase your chances of making it through that online filter?
So I'll say 2 things here. I think a lot of firms use online submission now, and sometimes that's the only way that you can submit. I encourage people to submit online if that's the process that the firm is using. I would say, though, one is make sure that you have a contact or a reference in your submission, in your cover letter, where you reference someone at the firm, someone you've spoken to, so that, there's a connection there. And to the extent that you can, contact that person ahead of time and say, listen, I'm submitting on the web through this online process. I'm mentioning your name. Thanks again for your help. Would it be possible for you to, talk to HR recruiting, just let them know that I've submitted? And that's a good way to make sure that your submission gets pulled up to the top. And then, of course, to the extent that you can find a recruiter, someone in HR, even if it's someone from potentially another school where that firm does recruit, or whether it's from through a friend of a friend finding someone in HR, to the extent that you can send them a note saying, got your name from so-and-so, I have submitted online, very excited about the process, and want you to know that I've submitted, and I'm hoping to hear back. Just again, so that there's a personal connection there outside of the web format.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, is it all right, Christine, if I just continue here with the interview process?
Yep, I think so. So everybody, just so you're aware, please submit your questions by chat once Kathleen's done going through kind of a bit more on the interview process. We're going to continue to do some open Q&A, so start sending those through as they occur to you.
Great. So what should you expect in the interview? Management, as I'm sure most of you already know, management consulting interviews are a bit different than a typical interview. All the firms will vary in the way that they interview candidates, but to be honest, not that much. Typically, you'll have 2 to 3 rounds of interviews. Starting with a first round either on campus or in a local office, again, if you don't have campus recruiting, in a local office or over the phone, with a post-MBA consultant or a more senior consultant. Often you'll have 2 of these interviews so that the firm can compare the opinions of both the consultants that interviewed you. In terms of your second round, typically it'll be actually in the office where you want to work. And it'll be with more senior people, so project leader, manager level, or partner level individuals of the firm. If you do have a third round, usually, again, it's that phone interview at the beginning, or it's a more senior later partner meeting after you've had the first 2 rounds, either because someone wasn't available during that second round or because there was another interim step. But again, 2 rounds is typically what you'll see, and you'll typically interview again with 2 people in the first round and then anywhere from 2 to 5 in the second round. The first round is really designed to test your problem-solving skills. The second round is more designed to test your fit with the firm, your maturity level in front of partners, etc. Like I said before, some of these firms now have tests either in the first round or before the first round. I've heard of some basic math tests, IQ tests, so look out for that because that is happening. And then some firms actually have a bit of a spin on the case interview, which we'll get to in a minute. Some of them will sit you down in a room with a piece of paper and a case, and you have 30 minutes to come up with an answer and present it back to them. Some will have you present to a group or work with other people interviewing on a case. So again, really important that you understand what exactly the interview is going to be like, because it can diverge. In terms of the really typical case, outside of the 2 I just described, typically you'll get your case within an interview. You'll have a few behavioral questions. I like to say anywhere between 2 and 5 behavioral questions, depending on the interviewer. And then you'll get into a 20 to 25-minute case, assuming the interview is 30 to 45 minutes. And the case really is where an interviewer will read you a scenario, typically a problem that they've worked on with a client, and they'll basically condense it down into a small version that they can work on with you. The purpose of the test, of this case, is not for you to solve the case. Usually a consultant's had 3+ months with a client to solve the issue. They're not expecting you to solve it in 20 minutes. They want to test your ability to see the key issues, to ask the right questions, and generally to be calm and collected through this process, which is often the hardest part. I will not tell you that the math is not important. The math is important. You need to get the math right, and there is typically math in a case. It can be anything from working with percentages, which is often the case, to getting a graph, to getting a table of data. I've seen all kinds of different things, but there will be some form of quantitative analysis you have to do in the case, and it is important that you get it right. In terms of a typical approach, and I can go through this more with people in the question and answer if you want, but I have a typical approach to cases that I like to walk people through and that I work with on eVisors with people. What I would suggest is you repeat the case back to the interviewer that they've read to you in a bulleted form, just to make sure you got all the right points. You take a minute and develop a framework, and none of this 4 C's, 5 P's, etc. Develop your own unique framework to help you solve the problem. Explain your framework to the interviewer. Prioritize how you're going to attack the problem and proactively suggest that course of action to the interviewer. Ask questions and make sure they're relevant, make sure they're probing, and as you go down that course, and then analyze any data that the interviewer gives you. In terms of analyzing data, I always suggest, depending on your comfort level with math, that you take a minute to think about the math and get organized, do the calculations, and then present it back to the interviewer and explain to them your steps, not just the final number, so that they have a chance to interact with you on how you did the analysis. And at the end, if and when you have a chance, summarize your findings in a concise and often in a bulleted way. So I learned 3 things, or there are 3 recommendations we have, or there are 3 major risks, etc.
Excellent. One thing that I've heard and definitely experienced myself is that the culture at consulting firms can be quite collegial. To what extent during the interview would you recommend that candidates be strictly professional versus being friendly and more open? I typically don't tend to suggest at the beginning, even though often it's easier with behavioral questions to be more open. I really would suggest that you work to develop a rapport with the interviewer early, because you only have 30 to 45 minutes, but that you make sure you're answering those behavioral questions
in a more professional and put together way. You want to come across as though you've prepared. As you get through the case, though, I think that's where you can start to really interact with the interviewer as you're asking them questions, as you're walking them through how you think about a problem. Let them know the kind of person that you are. For example, if you get a table of data, say, great, okay, if you wouldn't mind, what I'd like to do is just take a look at this data here for a minute, do some calculations, because it's better if I just focus on them myself for a minute, but then I'll absolutely take you through them and we can walk through how I did everything. Is that all right with you? And that gives the interviewer a sense that you are very calm, you know your strengths and weaknesses, you're going to attack the problem, but you're also asking them a question and letting them sort of suggest maybe an alternate route or tell you that they're not okay with that process. Where I would be really open and where I would sort of make sure that you get that connection is at the end, and by asking the interviewer, a more personal question. I know interviewers really are frustrated when they ask, when they say, okay, do you have any questions for me? And an interviewee says, well, like, what's it like to work at your firm? Or, how did you get into consulting? I think asking something like, what's the most interesting project you've been on? Or what's the most challenging project you've been on and why? Or I've heard that firm X is going through some financial struggles right now. I was reading the annual report. It looks like the last couple of years have been tough. How does it affect you as a consultant day to day? And then you really make it personal with the interviewer, and you can build a rapport with them.
Excellent. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions from the audience, and just cognizant of time here, I'm going to start shooting some of these towards you. When you look at the people that you've worked with, what kind of people do you find go into consulting and end up not liking it or not doing well? What are some of the red flags?
That's a great question. I think, and the reason why it's a really great question is because I think a lot of people think that consulting could be for anyone and everyone. The people that I typically see that are in consulting that aren't enjoying it are people that prefer to work alone or in front of their computer screen in a more static environment. So someone who is used to, people who've worked, for instance, in finance are used to sitting behind their computer screen for hours on end and analyzing a problem really on their own, and then working maybe with a manager to kind of pinpoint some issues and then back to their computer to work on the analysis. Consulting is not like that at all. You're with a team. You have people on your team that rely on you. They need that analysis for their part of their project, or you need something that they're working on, interviews that they've done with consumers, for instance, for part of your project. You have a manager on your case. You have a partner. All have different responsibilities, and you have clients. So you're working with a lot of different people all day, and if that's not something you're comfortable with, you will struggle in this industry.
Right. And then one of the other things that some people are quite concerned about is this concept of travel and long and sometimes unpredictable hours, which is definitely the case in some of the big consulting firms. If you're really intrigued by kind of the problem solving and the combination of analytical and strategic challenges, are there alternatives, or let's say within those groups of the industry that you looked at that perhaps have maybe less hours or less travel than others?
I would definitely say that the corporate consulting route, so working for a company that has an internal consulting function, is the one that strikes me as least likely for extended periods of travel, and more likely for you to feel, connection to your colleagues in an office at a firm. I think as you start to move towards some of the larger firms that have big projects in multiple cities, and if you're going to be in a city that maybe doesn't have a lot of clients that are located in and around that city, I think that's where you'll face a challenge in terms of your personal life. So I think you need to look at your own priorities as a candidate. If you really want to live in Seattle, That might mean that you're traveling unless you want to work at Starbucks. And if your firm doesn't work at Starbucks, then that's a problem, or Microsoft. I'm sure there's more companies in Seattle. I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean. So you really need to think about where you want to be, the kinds of firms that are there, and that'll really give you a sense for what your personal life will be like. Right.
Excellent. And then I'm going to take 2 more questions right now and then wrap up the webinar. So first is, if you think about extracurricular activities, what kind of activities that can you take up or highlight on your resume that would look good to a consulting firm and help improve your candidacy?
Definitely leadership positions, to the extent that you can manage a conference or put together some sort of speaker event, or if you are leading, either a student group on campus, a religious group, anything like that, that you can show that you're managing a group of people, you're managing a budget, you're managing events. I think those are really great skills to show a consulting firm that you can be a leader and a manager. I would also suggest, if you don't have a strong quantitative background, as we discussed, either your grades were weak in college, you don't have any sort of financial experience, that getting involved in some sort of financial extracurricular, whether it's taking an extra, an optional finance course, whether it's getting involved with the management consulting or finance club on campus and learning more about their activities, or taking some kind of extra course on modeling or something. You won't necessarily use all those skills in consulting, but it shows the interviewer and the firm that you recognized a weakness in your background and you acted on it in your free time at school.
Excellent. What would you say is the biggest thing that you have learned through your experience at consulting? What did you take away from it?
That's a great question. Oh, so many things. I think that, the most important thing that, personally that I think I've learned as a consultant is really how to work with people, and I can't emphasize this enough. How to be on a team, how to work with, other peers at your level, as well as managers, as well as senior partners, senior clients your level. You just work with so many different people that it's not that you put on a different face, but you're different with, I'm different with Christine than I am with a partner on my project, or than I am with the CEO of the client. And it really forces you to become adept at managing different types of situations with different people. And so I can sort of turn on different levels of professionalism, call it, or presentation skills or whatever, because I've been exposed to so many different levels, different types of people. And I think that is a real benefit of the job that I've seen in myself.
Excellent. Well, I know that we could go on forever here, but recognizing the time that we're at right now, I want to thank Kathleen very much for her participation in today's webinar. And if you advance one slide right now, then you'll see that Kathleen is, one of our most popular Evisors and has an excellent rating. So if you do want to follow up with her directly and have any specific questions for her, feel free to do that. And I noticed that, between October 24th, when you're back from Nepal, and before you start work, you have a lot of flexibility. So that could actually be a great time, particularly as that's also fall recruiting for many of the students on this line. So thank you very much, Kathleen. Any final remarks as we depart?
No, I just want to wish everyone good luck. It can be a tough slog, this interview process, and I remember recruiting vividly. So hang in there, and good luck.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who participated in today's webinar. We'll be distributing the recording and other materials through your career services next week. All right? Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.